If you have a Bible, you can be turning to the book of Romans. That's where we're going to be tonight. Last week, I introduced you to our new fall series in Romans. I know it doesn't feel like fall yet, but this is the fall series called The Rest of Romans. And we're going to be looking at those parts of this beloved letter of Paul that we might not talk about so much. So there are certain parts of this letter that we might know really well in our hearts, and then there are these other parts that might be harder to deal with for some reasons, or might have other reasons that we don't look at it so often. But there's a lot here to discover, and I look forward to getting into some of this with you, because this is where the gospel becomes real in people's lives, in these parts of Romans. Well, as you know by now, I hope, I like to try to capture your attention at the start of my sermons with something that can make it a little interesting for you. So how about this for tonight? Watch me try to say these old, obscure names. Romans chapter 16 and verse 1. I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a servant of the church at Cenchreae, that you may welcome her in the Lord in a way worthy of the saints and help her in whatever she may need for you. For she has been a patron of many and of myself as well. Greet Prisca and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus, who risked their necks for my life, to whom not only I give thanks, but all the churches of the Gentiles give thanks as well. Greet also the church in their house. Greet my beloved Epaenetus, who was the first convert to Christ in Asia. Greet Mary, who has worked hard for you. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my kinsmen and my fellow prisoners. They are well known to the apostles, and they were in Christ Jesus before me. Greet Ampliatus, my brother in the Lord. Greet Urbanus, our fellow worker in Christ, and my beloved Stachys. Greet Apelles, who is approved in Christ. Greet those who belong to the family of Aristobulus. Greet my kinsman Herodian. Greet those in the Lord who belong to the family of Narcissus. Greet those workers of the Lord, Tryphena and Tryphosa. Greet the beloved Persis, who has worked hard in the Lord. Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, also his mother, who has been a mother to me as well. Greet Asyncritus, Phlegon, Hermes, Patrobus, Hermas, and the brothers who are with them. Greet Philologus, Julia, Nereus, and his sister Olympus, and all the saints who are with them. Greet one another with a holy kiss. All the churches of Christ greet you. Not done yet. Timothy, my fellow worker, greets you, as so do Lucius and Jason and Sosipater, my kinsman. I, Tertius, who wrote this letter, this seems to be the scribe who wrote what Paul was writing, greet you in the Lord. Gaius, who is host to me, and to the whole church, greets you. Erastus, the city treasurer, and our brother Quartus greet you. Okay, how'd I do? A lot of names in this passage here. Now, I know what you're thinking, but I did not choose this passage of church names for tonight just so I could give you one more plug to fill out that membership update directory sheet if you haven't done it yet. That's what Sunday's for, when we just start calling roll at the start of service. I'm kidding about all of that, of course. When I was in school, I used to hate roll call. I don't know if y'all did this in class or maybe in gym class, but it just seemed like a waste of time to me. And there were always 2 or 3 people who weren't listening, or maybe they didn't recognize their own name. I don't know, but they wouldn't say anything. And then there were the cut-ups in class who would make their little jokes. In your class, did they ever do the one where they said president instead of present? I never understood that. Like, what's the joke in that? They just sound similar. There's really nothing to it. And then there was this one girl, Katrina Gibson. She was my nemesis in 4th grade. because the teacher assigned us all these specific roles that we were supposed to do throughout the year in class, and hers was to take attendance and call the roll. And the teacher would very often do this by giving her the roster and then going off to the office to like make some copies of some papers or something. So she had full rule of this. And throughout the entire year, despite many of my protests, I had to answer to Stefan Mead if I was going to be counted present. For a whole year through, I was Stefan Mead, according to the person taking roll. So I'm not a fan of the big roll call at start of class. I'm sure those of you who might have less common names, you probably know that and then some. Maybe that's what this passage seems like to us. It's typical when Paul writes a letter that when the church would receive it, they would read it aloud in its entirety to the whole church, to the whole congregation. And Romans is the longest one. I looked up some of you may like audio Bible things to listen to. I looked at several tracks for Romans, and it's usually the longest of the letters, and it takes about an hour to read through the book of Romans, this letter. Talk about a very anticlimactic way to end an hour-long sitting of reading Paul's words. Like, that's probably how it seems to me, maybe to you too, to end this all. The big climactic ending to the letter is just name after name after name after name. But I think that the last thing we need to do is think of this as just a list of names. Romans 16 is so much more than a list of names. And as much as I may struggle to pronounce them, this passage actually gives us this beautiful portrait of the reality of our faith, of the reach of the gospel, and most of all, of the relationships that can be had in Jesus. So tonight I want to talk about those three things just a little bit with you, and especially the last one. And I hope that at the end of it we can see that this is more than just a list. So let's start with the first one, this idea that Romans 16, it's more than just a list in that it actually gives us a sense of the realness, the reality of this faith that we believe in. And this is one of those rare cases where very fortunately, I was blessed to be able to see a little bit of this with my own eyes. So when Paul writes this letter, he is writing to the Romans. We know that from the title. But he is writing to the Romans from another familiar city for Bible people, the city of Corinth. So I got it up here on the map. Corinth is that yellow star in the middle of, or on the kind of west side of Greece. And then Rome is pretty far away from there, you know, in the central part of Italy. It's up in the top corner of the screen with that red star there. So Paul is in Corinth. He's writing to Rome. And when he writes to Rome, he's writing to a city that he's never been to. And to a church that he did not plant himself. Now, Paul really wants to go to this place. He has hopes and dreams that he's going to one day be able to visit the Roman Christians, and maybe even also that they might send him further on into Spain. But at this point, Paul has never, to our knowledge, been to Rome. It makes it kind of surprising that of all of Paul's letters where he lists out name after name after name, this one is by far the longest of all the names that he lists, even though he hasn't been there. And we might talk about that a little more next week. The whole first 16 verses are just people in Rome. But then those last few verses I showed you are the people in Corinth. They're giving greetings to the people over there that Paul is writing to. And there's one name in here in particular that I find really fascinating. The name Erastus. the city treasurer. Such an important little Bible detail because of this. This is a photo from the city of ancient Corinth. They found this in the 1920s. It probably just looks like, I don't know if you can even tell in that picture that there's carving into that slab of stone. That stone marks the beginning of a road that is gone. This stone is still there. This one stone. And it says on it, Erastus, a city official of Corinth, paid for this road to be built. It comes from the middle of the first century, right when Paul would have been in Corinth. And it's very likely to be our Erastus from Romans 16. So you have this piece of concrete evidence, just one little piece, that reminds us these are real people in a real world we're talking about here. Paul to Gentiles and kings, like God said that it would in Acts chapter 9 when he called Paul on the road to Damascus. These are real people in the real world. And this may be our Erastus, the city treasurer in Corinth. And that kind of actually speaks to the next point as well. Erastus, the city official, has somehow become convinced and converted to the gospel in a city filled with idols. And here he is, a city official. Not only is Erastus a real person, but he's also a living testament to the reach of this powerful gospel. The gospel has reached high into the authorities of Corinth, even at a time when they were running Paul out of town. And yet it made a difference in this man's life. The power of the gospel to reach him is evident. And it's not just evident there. When Paul writes this letter, Romans, he says that it's about the power of the gospel for salvation to everyone who believes. Emphasis on that word, everyone, right there. Everyone who believes. And that everyone includes a city official named Erastus. But that everyone also includes some other people. Everyone includes Aquila and Priscilla, or Aquila and Prisca as they're called here, but you may remember them from Acts chapter 18 in Corinth. These are Jewish people who converted to Christ and became good friends of Paul. And they're not alone. Here's some other folks who probably are also Jewish people. Mary is a Jewish name. Andronicus and Junia. Herodian. These other folks are called my kinsmen. So everyone, the gospel's power for everyone who believes includes these Jewish people. And then there's all the rest of the people that we listed who are not Jewish, and that's 25, 26, 27 plus names of Gentiles who are also being touched by the gospel. The gospel is reaching both. It's the power of God for everyone. That everyone includes the wealthy and the successful in this world. There's this guy Gaius mentioned. He's one of the ones in Corinth greeting the Romans. He's so well off that he hosts the entire church, the whole Corinthian church meets at his house. Because I guess he's doing pretty well. There's this other person, Phoebe. Very first one we meet in Romans chapter 16. She's called a patron of Paul. She's helping to bankroll the mission work And not just of Paul, but of many other people. Many people think Phoebe's the one who came and brought the letter from Corinth to Rome. So everyone included them. Everyone also included some, you might call common folks, maybe even some who were in dire situations. Back to Priscilla and Aquila, we know from Acts 18 that they were tent makers. They just had a job kind of commonly in the market. And not only that, but they spent some time in their life where they were refugees in a sense. In the about 10 years before Romans was written, the emperor Claudius kicked all the Jews out of Rome because of this disturbance, maybe having to do with Christians and the proclamation of the gospel. So here's some people who know what it's like to just be kicked out of your home. The gospel was for them too. And the gospel was for people who had spent some time in prison. Andronicus and Junia, which may be a married couple, were in prison, just like Paul, who wrote this letter, was also in prison. The gospel is the power for everyone, and that includes all manner of families. There's a couple of people who are mentioned singly. We don't know anything about their families, but they're not mentioned as having any family with them. There's a couple more who are mentioned in pairs. One of them we know for certain was a husband and wife. Perhaps some of the others were too. Then there's the mention of these families. 3 of them. The gospel was for everyone in that sense too. The single, the married, the family. This gospel for everyone cut across generations. So you have Rufus, who's worshiping alongside his mother in the same place, more than one generation. Everyone includes the locals, who might have grown up in Rome, but it's certainly not just them. Phoebe is from Cenchreae. Epaenetus is from Asia. Aquila and Priscilla are from Pontus, and they lived in Corinth. And Rome is the kind of city that brings all these people from all over the world together. How else would Paul know all these people? To list their names when he's never even been there himself. So there's people coming from everywhere. And so we have, in this list in Romans, this presentation of the gospel reaching people in all manners and walks of life. It's more than just a list. Not only do we have this illustration of the reach of the gospel across all kinds of different groups of people and in all kinds of places, but even more than that, if you think about why Paul includes this in the first place, it has to come down to his deep and heartfelt remembrance of the relationships that are formed in Christ. Paul has never been to Rome, but so much of his heart is already there. And this chapter is not just a list of names to him. It is like the best kind of remembering. So think about it this way. How many of you, if you've been baptized, remember the person who baptized you? You remember that? What is that memory like to you? Some of you may have had the chance to baptize someone before. What is that like for you? The power in baptism doesn't come from the person baptizing, but very often there is a special bond there in some cases, and there's just a truly sweet opportunity to share in the joy and the hope of that moment. It's a special thing. So think about Paul remembering that joy. Think about when he talks about Epaenetus. This is the first convert to Christ in Asia. The first one on a continent. Maybe comes from Paul's missionary work when he goes first missionary trip to Galatia, which is in, the southwestern part of Asia. Maybe that's where it comes from. Clearly, Paul knows him, calls him out by name, greet him for me. I wonder if maybe Paul was the one who baptized him. Does he remember him coming out of the water? Does he remember the look of joy in his eyes? Certainly he does with Gaius, because he straight up says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 that he baptized him. He knows that joy. It's more than just a name to him. Have you ever moved to a new town or a new job or a new school? Do you remember that first person that you really connected with? Like when you got there, maybe you didn't have a lot of connections already. Going off to college is like this for a lot of people. You remember when you made that first true friend in a new place? That's what this list is like for Paul. We talked about Priscilla and Aquila. They were the ones when Paul goes to Corinth and he doesn't have a place to stay. They open up their home to him. They help him find a job, which is working beside them every day. They welcome him at a time when every city Paul goes to, there's riots and persecution sprouting up all around him. And they've been kicked out of Rome, traveled all the way to Corinth to find a new life. They take him into their home. Think about how special that relationship must have been. More than just a name when they say, greet Priscilla and Aquila. Have you ever had a crisis in life and it drew you closer together with somebody? Like the fact that you walked that same road, or maybe you went through it together, or maybe they were just there for you, or you were there for them, and you just have that bond forever, right? You can always look back on that moment and remember how it brought you together. That's Andronicus and Junia for Paul. Not only did they spend some time in prison because of the gospel, he says, my fellow prisoner. It makes me wonder, were they there together? Sounds like it. We don't know where or when or for how long, but those are the kind of things that Paul would never forget. When you've gone through that with somebody, when you've walked the same road. Anybody here have somebody that you lovingly call mom who's not actually your mom? Or grandma or grandpa or dad? Paul has somebody like that. They're in the church in Rome. He says, greet Rufus, and greet his mother too, who has been a mother to me as well. For Paul, this is so much more than just a list. These are rich relationships formed in Christ. This is family. This is community. This is church. And it's not just the reach of the gospel we see here, but it's the results of the gospel. When it draws people together. And the good news is that's not just something for Paul to enjoy. This sweet remembrance, this special bond, is the thing that the church today strives for, and in many ways exists for, and in many ways endures because of those relationships, because of those bonds. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy to find that. I started with the end of the rest of Romans tonight. because to me, it's a great place to get to know these real people and think about this great thing that happened when God brought them together from all these different places. But when God brought these real people together from all these different places, what came with that were some real challenges, and it was really hard. And in some ways, you could say the fact that the gospel is for everyone who believes makes it harder, because it makes it to where you have to work with all manner of people who are brought together. We're going to talk about those challenges throughout this series. Those types of things are still hard today. But for tonight, let's dwell in this good thing, this good place. Let's think about those names in our lives who could be more than a list of names to us. It would be a wonderful thing to make a list and write down the name of someone you were thankful for. Thankful because you shared the same stretch of road. Thankful because you have the same hope in Jesus. Thankful because God brought them into your life and you came together. It would be great to write down a name, and then another name, and then another name after that, and think about how it's more than just names to you. The best sermon I ever heard on this chapter was an old grainy video recording. You don't hear many sermons on this chapter, so the bar wasn't set that high. But there was this old grainy video recording of this sermon I watched in preaching class, a sermon by a guy named Fred Craddock. Even the title for it, I was kind of jealous of. He called it "When the Roll is Called Down Here." Isn't that a great title? He tells a story near the end of that sermon that reminds me a lot of us. It was a story about a church that he was preaching in. They had a thing they did when someone was baptized that they would circle up at the end, like we do. That was kind of cool, but it was a smaller place. In total, it was 20, 30, at most 40 people on a real busting at the seams Sunday morning. So they would circle up, but it was just a small little circle. And so they would do this other thing as well. One by one, they'd go around the circle. They'd say their name. And if you ever need anything, and then fill in the blank. My name's so-and-so. And if you ever need help with your car, maybe I could fix it. Or do that kind of thing. Or my name is such and such, and if you ever need somebody to bake a cake for your kid's birthday party, I just love baking a cake. My name is, and if you need someone to pray for you, help you watch your kids, bring you food when you're sick, put a card in the mail, and around the circle they go, saying their names, and then inviting that person, new in Christ, to see it as more than just a name, as a friendship, as a family, as companions together in Christ. And if we can take anything from this roll call in Romans, maybe it can be something like that. Not only can we give thanks for the people that God has put in our lives that bring that joy of remembering into our hearts, but maybe we can also be the kind of people to say our names and fill in the blank for someone else who's a part of this family. We can be the kind of people who invite a deeper connection through who we are and what we bring to the church. And maybe tonight that's what you need to hear. Maybe you need some encouragement from the real people who are sharing in this road with you. We're a group of imperfect people here, and it's okay if we sometimes need a little help from one another. That's what we're here for. Maybe you needed to hear that the gospel is for everyone who believes. That includes you. That includes others too. And if you or somebody who's watching online with us tonight, when you're ready to respond to that gospel, we're ready too, because it is for you. And we hope to see you take hold of it. Maybe tonight you need to just simply give thanks for the family of God and the fact that he has brought us together in such a beautiful way into these rich relationships formed in Christ. However you might be called or challenged, we invite you to give thanks and to respond while we stand, while we sing.